Good morning. I am Mario Gangemi, serving as the acting chair for the MDTA Capital Committee this morning. I hereby call the meeting of the Capital Committee to order at, it is 9:04 a.m. Due to the COVID-19 situation and in accordance with the new live streaming law, this meeting is being conducted via live video conference and live streamed on the MDTA Capital Committee page. All members will have their video active during the entirety of the meeting. To minimize the background noise during the call, I ask that everyone on the line please mute your phones except when speaking. When presenting or answering a question, we ask that you turn your video and audio on when speaking, and when done, turning your video off and putting your audio on mute. Evidently, we have no members of the public who have pre-registered to comment on today's meeting, so we will move on to agenda item number 1, which is approval of our open and closed session meeting of October 1st, 2020.
So moved.
All right, Member Cox moved. Member King, so you have to second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, aye. Okay, so we are good for that. The next item is Mr. Wolf talking about the deck overlay on the FMT bridge south of the tunnel.
Okay, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
I'm here this morning to talk about contract FT 3013-0000. This is the deck rehabilitation and joint modifications to bridges on I-95 ramps south of the Fort McHenry Tunnel. The scope of work includes joint replacements, placement of rapid set latex modified concrete overlays, and other miscellaneous work described in the contract documents. The contract does have state allowance items. We have a $250,000 miscellaneous repair allowance, a $10,000 partnering allowance, and a $25,000 railroad coordination item. The engineer's estimate for the contract is $9,369,025. We advertised this project on May 12th of this year, and we received bids on September 17th. We did receive 4 bids, with the low bid being submitted by Marksman Company in the amount of $6,872,549.56. We are recommending Marksman Company for award of this contract. Their bid price is approximately 27% below the engineer's estimate. There were no bid protests or rejections. And due to the difference in engineer's estimate and bid price, we did perform a bid justification. The MBE goal for this contract was set at 26% with sub-goals and a 1% VSBE goal. Marksman has submitted a plan that has a 26.01% MBE percentage and a 1% VSBE. And that plan is currently pending approval with our Civil Rights and Fair Practices group. Marksman has a history of doing work for the authority, including the FT 3001 contract, as well as the current emergency procurement on FT 3022, the Moravia Road Bridge. The contract duration, we anticipate the notice to proceed to be January of 2021 with a duration of 730 days. And we are seeking the Capital Committee's approval to move the contract on to full board approval and contract award. Thank you.
All right. Any discussion or questions?
Yeah. Question. Again, we've seen disparities as far as engineers estimates and the final bids. is that when you took into account and you review the disparity, you did probably identify where the disparity was as far as the engineer's estimate and the final bid?
Yes, we did. For example, we received a question during the bidding phase regarding staging areas and whether the authority would be providing a staging area. And our response is we were not, that it would be left to the contractor to identify and provide his own staging area. So what we did for that is in our mobilization item, where we typically provide a percentage of, say, 7 to 10% of the engineer's estimate for mobilization, we increase that percentage up to about 12% to account for contractors needing to identify and locate staging areas, because working in the downtown urban setting, it's difficult to find locations to set their equipment and stage their materials. So we increased that percentage.
Right.
Marksman's estimate, however, their mobilization cost came in at 5.5%, which is much lower than what we anticipated. However, we think that's a reflection of the fact that they are currently doing a significant amount of work for the authority, and they also have a yard within, I believe, about 9 miles of the project site. So they are local, and they are therefore able to leverage that with their bid items. So in an instance such as this, that's where we're seeing the disparity.
Good, thank you.
We have a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Member Cox motions to approve. Member Gaines, you're on, I think you're on mute. I don't hear you.
I guess what I wanted to say was I mean, we're all very happy with the bid, I think, below the engineer's estimate, but I don't think having a yard 9 miles away is going to save them $2 million. So, but whatever. I mean, they just basically think they can do it for less money than some of the other guys. That's all, you know, in terms of the actual concrete work. And that's really where the heart of the matter is, I believe. I mean, you might save $100,000 or $200,000 by having a convenient, by being close, but I don't think that you're kidding yourself. You think that's a big portion of the savings, but just be happy that they're saving us money is what I'd say.
Right.
So,
Is that a second, Member Gaines?
yeah, it's a second.
Okay. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. That measure is approved. We are now moving on to Abby Tamrat with the maintenance and repairs of the I-695 Curtis Creek drawbridges.
Good morning. This is Abby Tamrat. I'm presenting KB 3015, maintenance and repair of Curtis Creek drawbridges. The scope of work includes providing labor, equipment, materials, and access necessary to perform mechanical, electrical, structural, and other maintenance-related work on both inner loop and outer loop Curtis Creek bridges. The contract includes $270,000 as an allowance item for specialized subcontractors, equipment, and other miscellaneous items. The engineer's estimate for this contract was $2,899,370. Advertised on June 18, 2020, bids received on September 17, 2020. 2 bids were received. Low bid was submitted by Chambro Corporation in the amount of $2.8 million. We are recommending award of this contract to Chambro Corporation. Low bid price was 3% below the engineer's estimate. I'm sure you'll like that. There was no bid protest on this contract. Bid analysis was not needed because of the percentage difference. MBE goal for this contract is 19% overall with no sub goals. The VSBE goal is 1%. And DOP can chime in on what Chambro proposed on this contract. So Chambro has successfully completed identical work on the Curtis Creek Bridge. In fact, the last maintenance contract, KB 3003, from 2016 to 2019 was performed by Chambro, and we were very happy with their work. NTP is anticipated in March 2021, and the contract duration is 1,095 days, calendar days. That's a 3-year contract. We are seeking recommended approval from Capital Committee to present this contract to the full MDTA board in anticipation of approval for the contract award. Thank you.
So I'll start off with the question. You referenced the MS or the MBE goals, and we have in our information the goal, the advertised goal, but we don't see the proposed goal.
Yes, Donna. Go ahead.
Good morning, members. For the record, this is Jeff Davis, Deputy Director of Procurement for MDTA. And I did notice that as well. I am pulling up the records here, and it shows that Chambro has committed 19.07% of MBE and 1% of the SPE.
All right, so we're good there. Fantastic. So I will entertain a motion.
I have a question. There's not specific repairs to be done on it. This is just a general take care of anything that needs to be repaired over the next 3 years, I guess. Is that the heart of the matter?
So the way this contract works is we have typical maintenance of the mechanical system. But as they maintain the system, if they find something, some parts needs to be replaced, then we have an on-call items in the contract to replace those. So it's the majority of work will be maintenance, unless they find something in this mechanical system or electrical.
How old are these bridges?
One was from the 70s, and the outer loop was from the 80s.
Hey, well. And how often are they used? I mean, how often do they operate? Do you know?
When you say operate, I mean the bridges, we get like more than 6 times a month bridge opening. So we get yes. It's every month is kind of average.
6 times a month, is that all? Okay.
Yeah, it can be up, but it can be more and less, but we can't decide the schedule.
Right, okay.
I just want to add too, just briefly, that for the record, this is Will Pines, Chief Engineer for MDTA. Want to add to Member Gaines that the last major rehabilitation contract that we recently did for the Curtis Creek Bridge, it did not include a lot of the work on the approach spans to the actual bascule bridge. So this contract will allow work throughout the entire bridge length. So anything from damaged concrete or otherwise, the entire bridge can be covered. So just want to make that point, that some of the repairs that will be done will be for portions of the bridge that have not recently been rehabilitated.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, now are we ready to make a motion?
So moved.
I'll make a motion that we accept the contract.
I second.
All right, beautiful. You read my mind. All right, so Member Gaines motioned and Member Cox seconded. Any further discussion or questions? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
All right, so we are approved for the maintenance and repairs of the I-695 Curtis Creek drawbridges. Now we will move on to Ms. Marriott to talk about the final 2021 to 2026 CTP.
Good morning. My name is Jeannie Marriott, and I am the Capital Program Manager. I'm here today to ask for the Capital Committee's recommendation for approval of the proposed fiscal year 21 through 26 final CTP. And the final CTP will also be presented to the Finance Committee on November 10th for recommendation for approval, and to the full MDTA board for final approval on November 19th. The 6-year budget in the proposed final CTP is $2.8 billion. This is a net decrease of $7.4 million from the draft CTP. To see how we arrived at this decrease, let's turn to attachment number 1, CTP comparison tables. And looking at the column titled Total 2021 through 2026, On line 1, we see a $1.1 million decrease in the Nice Middleton Bridge replacement project. Line 2 is the I-95 ETL Northern Extension. Excuse me. There is a $3.2 million decrease in the 6-year period. Line 3 is the remainder of the CTP, not including the reserves. There's an increase of $154.3 million. In line 4, there's a $157.4 million decrease in the reserves. Line 5 is the remainder of the CTP, including the reserves. And in line 6, the total of all changes in the fiscal year 21 to 26 time period is a decrease of $7.4 million. To the left in the 2020 column of line 6, we see the fiscal year 20 expenditures were projected at $449.8 million. This amount was amended to $465.4 million in September. The fiscal year 20 spending was $463.6 million, resulting in a $1.8 million underspending of the amended budget. Now, if you'll turn to attachment number 2, this is a list by project of the changes in the total estimated cost and the changes in the 21 to 26 time period. The first category is new projects added. There were 4 system preservation projects and 3 enhancement projects added for an increase of $7.6 million. And you'll note that I didn't include the cost of the Maryland 24 northbound auxiliary lane. And that's because it is included in the I-95 ETL Northern Extension group of projects. Next, there were 6 projects modified to add the construction phase, which resulted in an increase of $107.2 million. There were 2 projects completed with a net decrease of $712,000. Then beginning on page 2 and continuing to page 4, are 89 projects that were modified due to cost changes and cash flow adjustments for a net increase of $37.9 million. Next are the reserves that decreased by $157.4 million. And finally, there's a summary of the project budget changes and the reserve changes that resulted in the $7.4 million final CTP decrease. Moving on to attachment number 3. The pie chart represents the allocation by facility of the $2.8 billion final CTP. The Kennedy Highway facility is the largest at 36%, and this is due primarily because it includes the I-95 ETL Northern Extension projects. The Nice Middleton Bridge facility is second at 18%, and that does include the bridge replacement. Now, if you'll turn to attachment number 4, this shows the categories of projects funded in the final CTP. Safety and capacity improvements is the largest, 37%. This category includes cashless tolling conversions and many projects from the I-95 ETL Northern Extension. Bridge replacements are the second at 22%. This category includes the Nice Middleton Bridge, the I-95 bridge replacement, and bridges that are being replaced as part of the I-95 ETL extension. Now I'm asking for your recommendation for approval of the final CTP, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Chairman, I have Jeannie, thank you. I guess the question is, I know it's a decrease, but in your opinion, does this slow down any of the ongoing project at this point, or just extends out?
Are you asking me if it's slowing down any of the ongoing projects that decrease?
Yes.
That actually, some of the projects are going to be taken a little, like the ETL North. I can see Will's just chomping at the bit. Go ahead, Will.
Okay, Jeannie.
We're
No,
just
I
gonna
was
try to slow you
waiting to
down,
see if you
Jeannie.
needed help. I was going to let you go. You were spot on that the reductions for COVID, the primary change that we had to make was in adjusting the ETL opening date. We had originally announced that we were targeting the full ETL completion in 2026 in order to deal with the impacts of COVID-19. We adjusted that opening date to 2027. And so this is reflecting some of the changes into the start dates of some projects in order to essentially stretch out the cash flows to make that, the budget that we needed to make.
It doesn't look like it made much of an effect on the overall program. It looks like we were spending pretty close to the same amount of money. I mean, was it $7 million? I have to go back and look at it, but it was a very small amount.
Yeah, it's
for the
7.4
5-year
million.
program.
Right.
$7 million. What's that?
And that
So
is a
really,
small
we
change
really-
overall.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about billions of dollars here. So
Yeah.
I mean, you think we'll be able? I guess we're just assuming our revenue is going to jump right back where it was. I guess, right? Next year.
Were you going to hear some extensive reports about that at the
Yeah.
at the full board meeting? And
And
Just judging by the fact that really, as far as I'm concerned, there was really no change to the capital program. Maybe we're stretching out the ETL,
Very
but there's
little.
other things that have been exhausted.
Right. Originally, with the ETL program, the schedule, the way that we had it, the FY 21 to 26 CTP would have actually increased higher than the 20 to 25 program, but we've kept it flat, which was necessary in order to meet
Keep from
the
increasing
demands.
more. I see.
Right. Correct.
Good morning. This is Deb Sharpless.
Morning.
The CTP that's
Hi, Deb.
presented, it aligns with what we talked about at the board meeting and, allows us to achieve our financial standards. And as Jeannie reported, from my perspective, a $7 million change is essentially flat when you're
Right.
talking about billions of dollars. So
Yeah.
This is really no change from the draft CTP that you previously approved. And this capital program financially works for the agency.
Awesome. With that being said, do we have a motion to move to
I'll make
the?
a motion.
All right. So I think Mr. Cox beat Mr. Gaines to the motion. So
Oh, no.
All right. Second.
all right, Member Gaines second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All
Oh, and
right.
let me just comment. I like the pie charts. Keep them up.
Yeah.
okay,
Just
all
perspective.
righty.
All right. Thanks, Jeannie. Appreciate it.
Thank
All
you.
right. The next item is Mr. Harkness talking about how they do these engineers' estimates that are just slightly higher than the numbers we get back.
Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right,
Yeah.
great. So in your materials, you should have the presentation for the development of engineers' estimates. So on slide 2, kind of covering the purpose, the procedures, and the resources we use for the development of these engineers' estimates. So, we undertake these estimates, the preparation of these, trying to utilize as much detail as we can to, give them a sufficient attention because we know just how much energy the contracting industry puts into these. But it is also important to recognize that the engineer's estimate is a portion of the overall funding for a project, and especially for our capital program as a whole. So, of course, project and program estimates also include figures for right-of-way, preliminary engineering efforts, planning efforts, also included CMI, payments for third parties, utilities, police, And then, of course, another portion of what we do is adjust cash flows, as sort of we were just hitting on some of those things earlier in some of the items that you've discussed during this meeting. So as you know, the underestimating these the bids causes issues with our availability to spend monies on other projects if we haven't correctly allocated funds to the projects that are bidding. And of course, overestimating causes us to not use funds that could be used on other projects.
So you're best to get it right, is what you're saying.
Yeah. And so additionally, the engineer's estimates, they serve as a benchmark for us as the owner in terms of analyzing the bids that we do receive, reviewing those, breaking them down to determine, if we believe them to be fair and reasonable. And of course, it's essential to the project approval process, which is what you guys went through earlier today. I guess, another thing is that, we utilize the analysis that we perform and the history of developing these engineers' estimates throughout the design process to understand if what the bidding environment looked like and if what we're getting back is reasonable from these contractors. So the procedures that we use are originally based on a manual from SHA. So they have the Highway Construction Estimating Manual that detailed out just the steps that you utilize and some of the assumptions that you make as you're developing estimates. SHA also carries contingencies, or they used to, through the design process. Now, MDTA, we also have our own project delivery guidelines. So we spell out a few things in there that are pertinent to the development of the engineer's estimates. And we'll be going over that in another next slide. So moving down to the resources, there's a number of resources that we use. And of course, that these resources will be dependent upon our approach to how we're going to estimate a project. Are we going to use actual costs, current cost? Are we going to use historical bid data, either from ourselves or from SHA? Is it a combination of those? So that's one of the things that we look at. And if it's historical data, we can utilize the SHA price index. As I said, we have our own historical bid data because we have several facilities that are unique in the state. So we would have our own bid histories of how we bid certain items. And of course, there's the industry standards of ENR, the price index, RS means, NHCCI. So we have a couple of national resources as well. And of course, those are using historical data, so that's a lagging price indicator. So sometimes, depending on the project and what's going on, we will try to gather actual cost data as recent as possible to make the best decisions on how we're putting our bid together. Okay, if we move to slide 3. This is going over the submittal stages for the estimate. Of course, they correspond with the major milestone submissions in a project. So with the planning level estimate from planning, the estimate is based on major quantities out of that point. So you're talking about estimating the cost per mile of roadway, or the cost per square foot of structure, in order to get your major quantities estimate. And you're looking at carrying a 40% contingency on that. Next, we'll move into the TSNL estimate, which is our 30% estimate. At this point, we're requiring the estimate to be based on actual quantities and development of unit prices at this point. However, because we're only at 30%, we're not funded for construction. We're funded in the program for PE at this point, possibly right of way. We're looking at carrying a 30% contingency through the 30% submittal phase. Now, as we move into the later phases of design, so we're talking about the semifinal 60%, 90%, and eventually 100%. This is when at 60% level is when we fund for construction. So that's the new projects that you hear about moving into the CTP when we're going through that process. Those are the projects that have progressed to the point where we've reached 60% submittal and we're ready to fund for construction. So at that time, we have our final itemized estimates with, again, using actual quantities and unit prices developed based on however we've decided we're approaching that particular item. And then, of course, at the 60% now, we've dropped to a 0% contingency. So we don't carry that contingency into the CTP when we fund for construction. That was a departure from that we put into place a few years ago from the normal estimating process. We used to carry contingencies up until 100%, and the reason for that was we had performed some study into our history of developing the estimates with the contingencies. We looked at where the project budget was at these different milestone submittal phases, and then we looked at what were our resulting low bids, months, years down the road, and we were looking and determining that that we were essentially just carrying extra dollars in the CTP because a lot of the low bids were coming in relatively close to the semifinal estimate without the contingency. So because we a few years ago were in the underspending area and looking to increase our expenditures closer to 90, 95, 100% of the budget, we instituted the policy to carry 0% contingencies on those later designs, submittals, and estimates. Okay, so moving on to slide 4. Go into a little bit of the quality control of the estimates. So as I discussed in those prior slide, we have estimates updated for each of the milestone submittals based on the changes and the re-estimation of quantities and prices. And those are distributed to all the stakeholders. And that's a part of the review process is to look at the unit prices and compare those with what we've been seeing historically and making sure that we can agree on that the prices are reasonable for this project. Of course, the designers, when they're approaching it, they have to select sometimes they have to make decisions about the project, how the project we think would be approached by contractors. So we have to sort of decide how we're going to estimate a project, and sometimes we're not always finding that we don't always match up with the contracting community. They may find a better way to approach projects, and I think we've discussed that at length in prior meetings where we've seen some estimates vary from the low bids, and we've talked to contractors and they've kind of let us know where we estimated differently approaches than they did. So we also have the design manager. We have to, as a design manager, there are certain forms that they review. They have a checklist that they refer to that make sure that all the work in the project is included in the estimate and therefore also over in the specifications, that the quantities are accurate, are correct, and that the unit prices are appropriate. As part of our design process, we have an independent reviewer, and part of the independent reviewer's task is to review the engineer's estimate for reasonability check. Additionally, and this is for large projects, we will hire a third-party independent cost estimator for performing a detailed review for the projects that are over $50 million. Okay, so that's how we
Real quick,
go ahead. Yes.
that third party, I assume is that a contractor? When I say contractor, somebody in the construction business, or is it another, an engineering consulting firm?
It oftentimes is someone with contracting experience and construction contracting experience.
Okay.
That's what we would to look for there, so that we have a contractor's view on these larger projects.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to slide 5. This is now kind of going into a little bit of the history of the performance of our engineers' estimates against our bids. So we took a look back to 2016 fiscal year and provided up through 2020. So in this table, you can see how many bids were received for those fiscal years. Then the next column is the percentage that the low bids varied from the EE. So each of the 5 years shown here, the EE was higher, in some cases slightly higher, in some cases significantly higher, or higher than the low bids we were receiving there. The next column was showing the average bid. So the average for each of the projects bid, that was showing all of the bids averaged together and comparing that to what the EE was. So you can see for some of the years, the average bid was much closer to the EE, and in fact, the total for the average of those 5 years was exactly equal to the EE. So the average of all the bids received for those 5 years, at the end of it, when we averaged it all together, it came out to the average for the engineers' estimates for all those projects, for those 88 projects. And then
I have a question.
Go ahead. Yes.
Jim, I mean, where you came up with 149.5 million,
yes,
that was it's underspending. Is that what you're saying here?
That's correct. Yes, you got it. So it's showing
total underspending from your
yes,
engineer's estimate.
That's right. So the bids received came in that much below the EEs for those years.
How about
most of it was on the one
extra
job? It looks like.
Well,
Half of it was.
Yeah, there's 2 years that stick out, right? So 2016 and 2018. 2016, that's a difference of 40 million there. We had 2 projects, the Bay Bridge suspension cable and the Patapsco Flats project on BHD, that accounted for more than half of that 40 million. And then in 18, we had the I-895 bridge project. So if you recall, that was a $61 million under the engineer's estimate on that one. So
I think
those
you're doing pretty well, really.
Yeah, so those numbers get skewed a little bit. Yep. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, that 149, it was obviously for the year in which we received the bids, we couldn't do anything with that money, but we have turned that into and rolled out other projects because of this difference here.
Okay. Question.
Yes.
Who does it engineer's estimate? Is it our staff engineers doing it, or is it the consultant for that particular job?
Yeah, it's definitely the design team, which involves our own in-house project managers, but it certainly the designers we put in the most work on the engineer's estimate in terms of you know, how they put the items together, depending on, you know, how we approach it, if it's a lump sum item, if it's each, you know, depending on our approach there. They certainly have a lot of input. They do the you know, the research on when we're trying to obtain you know, recent pricing, and so the project manager in-house, our staff, you know, discusses the approaches that they take, you know, whether that's reasonable. Or you know, we tend to have, you know, the historical view of things, so you know, how to put certain bids together on certain of facilities that we have. So certainly it's a collaborative effort there.
Right. I think it's important to have people who've been out in the field and talk to the contractors and try to understand a little bit like their difficulties, which I guess that's the case, because that'll get you better estimates, I believe.
Right. Okay. Any other questions on this table?
No, go ahead and move.
So page 6, this is just a chart to sort of capture some of another way of looking at the performance of our engineers' estimates. So you know that we have a range of estimates, and if the bids come within 10% over the engineers' estimates or 15% under, we consider that acceptable, and then we do a detailed justification if we're outside that range. So what this chart was trying to show was for each of the 5 years studied, 16 to 20, we presented the red bar is the engineer's estimate plus 10%. The purplish bar is engineer's estimate minus the 15%. And then the green bars estimate or show the average of the low bids. So that's the actual low bid received. So you can see for the 2 years we discussed a little bit on the table, 16 and 18, the low bids came in just below our lower boundary of 15% below the engineer's estimate. But for 17, 19, and 20, you can see it kind of as a stepped gradation down there from the 10% over to the actual low bid, and then to the 15% under. So this was trying to show that we're, you know, even though when we're, you know, receiving our bids, we obviously, you know, receive the lowest bid and we accept the lowest bid, which, you know, again, that in itself is tough to when you're estimating, because you know, it's the lowest of the bids received. So as you saw from the table, the average, we tended to get really close to the average of the bids received. So, but this just kind of also shows,
right, Jim?
Yeah, that's the challenge. Yeah, because you know, if you're you know, statistically getting the average accurate, then you're still going to be under with your low bid, and so. And that's where in the challenge lies. But this graph was trying to show that, you know, for outside of these 2 years that had some major projects happening in them and major differences, that generally we're falling with the low bid between that, in that acceptable range on average. Of course, that's averaging ones that go above and the ones that go below. And then at the end of the year, though, we're looking like, you know, in pretty good shape here. So that was the end of my presentation. So if you have any other questions, I'll try to answer them now.
That was a good presentation. I didn't realize this much went into it. I just thought you had a dart and threw it at the dartboard.
We try not.
Thank
Great.
you. Very, very good, Jim. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
sure thing.
Well, I guess that wraps us up. Appreciate your time on that, Jim.
Yes.
Anything else for the good of the cause, and or is there a
I make
motion?
a motion that we adjourn.
All right, motion to adjourn. All right, Mr. Gaines, motion to adjourn. Member Cox seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All
Have a
right.
safe round today, Lee.
Thank you.
We are adjourned.